Um, I guess in a lot of ways, U of M chose me. I was a basketball player, and I did really well in high school, and so I both had an opportunity to play basketball at Michigan, but also I had a full academic scholarship, and so when my parents and I stepped back and looked at all the choices we had, it was the kind of really the only logical place for me to go. Plus, it was just 45 minutes up the street, so it wasn't this huge. It wasn't as huge of a social adjustment as it could have been. It was a little bit of a blur. It was a little bit of a blur. I can't. I mean, I, I was on campus sooner than everybody else because of basketball. Lived in South Quad. I think probably probably my biggest impression of starting Michigan as an undergrad was just how socially different it was from where I grew up. It was really the first time I had been in a non-majority black setting, and so that was kind of one of my earliest impressions was just absorbing how Ann Arbor was really this melting pot. I always hate that mixing bowl of people from just different places, and so that's probably one of my earliest, I guess, recollections and impressions of the place. Yeah, I cheated a little bit. So my one of my very close friends from high school was my roommate, and then we somehow landed on a floor. I think there were maybe five of us from Detroit on the same and this was totally random on the same floor, and so it was a little bit mix of both. I mean, it was a mix of, I had one foot in the sport in the student athlete world, one foot kind of in this like Detroit expat world, and then the newness of Ann Arbor. So I think it was a mix. No, yeah. I didn't. And so I was there in the mid '90s for undergrad, and my impression, even because I was there in the mid '90s, and then I was back again in Ann Arbor in the mid 2000s, and grad school is fundamentally the grad school experience is fundamentally different than the undergrad experience, but when I got back in the mid 2000s, I do remember thinking that the tenor of the place had changed a little bit. It didn't feel as though there were as many Detroiters in Ann Arbor as there had been when I was there for undergrad. When I was in undergrad, and I went to Renaissance High, which is which is sort of one of the you have to test to get into it, so it's one of the better schools in Detroit, public schools in Detroit. And don't hold me to this, but there was something like 25, 26 people from my graduating class that went to Michigan. And so, I mean, then that was just, the times were just very different. So that was one school, and that was 25 people that I knew were from Detroit that I had spent 4 years with. And so, by the time I got back for grad school, it didn't feel like that Detroit to Ann Arbor connection that pipeline was as strong as it was when I was an undergrad. So. Oh gosh, no. I must have changed like 4 or 5 times. It's. I think it's like particularly cruel to force somebody 17 or 18 to try to figure out what they want to do for the rest of their life. And I tried. I made a really good effort at it. I started in. Let me try to think about all the things I tried. I started in engineering. Wasn't a fit. So I think I'm pretty sure I started in the School of Engineering. So it wasn't a fit, and then I switched over to LS&A, dabbled in a few things, and ultimately what I really liked was anthropology and the science-based anthropology. And I had planned on going to medical school, so the goal all along was to go to medical school. And so I guess I rationalized it in the time that as long as I hit the requirements to get into medical school, it didn't really matter what I majored in. I'm not so sure I would make that same decision again, because it turns out it does matter, and the stuff that I liked doing was also kind of the same stuff that is really hard to make money at, and so I ended up with one of those degrees. But that's why grad school.
Yeah. Oh, why did you choose to go to grad school?
I think I had always planned to go to grad school. I don't know that there was ever a moment that even back in high school, that I thought undergrad was a terminal degree. I mean, I started out undergrad thinking I was going to medical school. I had a clinical experience in my early 20s in a hospital setting, my first, and it kind of made me question whether medicine was the right fit for me. Again, with trying to figure out what you want to be for the rest of your life in your late teens, early 20s. It turns out that medical school probably would have been a very bad life decision for me, and I figured that out. And so what I fell into ultimately was nonprofit work, and was really enjoying doing community-based work, but wanted to put myself in a position where I could do it at a more impactful, at a higher level. And so that kind of channeled me to law school.
Yeah. So what is it about nonprofit work, community work, that really attracts you?
I don't know. It resonates. It just feels real to me. Like I spent years working on Wall Street for a big investment bank. And it was supposed to be this sexy high finance job. And, there were aspects of it that were pretty cool. But at the end of the day, I always had this feeling that my work in corporate finance didn't really matter. And that's a very different feeling than working in the public sector. And so I spent 2 years from 2013 to the end of 2014 working on Detroit's bankruptcy. And I always kind of use that as a classic example for why public sector nonprofit work resonates with me. We were faced with having to kind of rethink the city's future and the city's financial footing. At the same time, making a whole lot of changes around how the city operates, and there was nothing that we did that didn't connect on a very personal level, right? So when I think about finance, like great bond issuance, great another merger and acquisition, fine, but every single thing that happens, particularly in the public sector, it touches us in some form or fashion. Like we all care about, we all have to care about public safety. We all have to care about education. We all have to care about infrastructure. And so there's this realness to it, and then sort of the connection to why it matters was just something that I just never, I just never found that in corporate, and it turns out that it's pretty meaningful for me. So, it matters that Detroit figures out how to get the lights turned back on. It matters that Detroit figures out how to make sure that police show up when a crime is happening, that EMS shows up in time to save someone's life. And so all that is just, I don't know, it feels like it has purpose. And that, I think that's what that's what pulled me to nonprofit work at first. And I think that's what ultimately has kept me around that sphere. I don't know that I studied all the time, but I read a lot. Mm-hmm. I read a lot. I've since learned there's a difference between reading and studying. and so I was constantly reading and exploring in school. Studying tended more to be this sprint to the finish line around finals time, and so which probably not the right way to do it, but. I actually had a lot of fun, and I had a whole lot of fun in undergrad. Do I remember any big social issues? Not really. Certainly not of the variant that I experienced when I came back in the 2000s for grad school. Because I came back as Grutter and Gratz was working its way through the legal system and through the law school, and so that was a very, very much a different environment than in the 90s. But honestly, it was a perfectly fun, sort of what I expected college, almost exactly what I expected college to be like. The curve was a little more brutal than I expected, but other than that, it was
Right.
Yeah.
So what was that difference then when you came back for grad school? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, when I came back for grad school, the because I started in law school, and certainly there was a lot of attention, focus, energy investment around the two Michigan affirmative action cases, and so there very much was like a polarized environment, if you will. Not so much at the law school. I mean, I think the law school was absolutely fantastic in how they handled it. But certainly, if I'm comparing to my time in undergrad, there was a lot more dialogue around minority access to higher ed and what that needed to look like in the application process. A lot more questioning about whether sort of it was a fair thing to do versus the right thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. So, um, I don't know that I would go like calling it hostile goes too far, goes a little bit further than I'm prepared to, but certainly there was this racial awareness that I experienced in the mid 2000s that I'm not so sure left the imprint on me in the 90s. A few things. I mean, going to Michigan was without question, and I would make this case for both my undergrad and my graduate experience. It without question was a life altering experience. Going to Michigan versus some of the other places that I could have gone to for undergrad, it set me on a different trajectory. People, right or wrong, the reputation of Michigan signals something different than some of the other places I had looked at, and I've been able to kind of leverage and carry that throughout. Um, I met really, really fantastic people there. Some of I married a fellow student athlete. My best friend is somebody that I met there, and so I have all these, and I can just keep going down the list. I have all these amazing, really close personal friendships that started either in undergrad, and certainly in grad school. You know, it is nice to know that people that the alumni base is literally everywhere, and I have very much been on vacations in far-flung places only to have on a little piece of gear and somebody goes, "Oh, when were you in Ann Arbor?" And so there's a coolness factor there, but professionally, I mean, again, Michigan and the networks from my three different programs there have just been absolutely amazing. I mean, the number of times that I've reached out blindly, coldly to someone simply because they went through Michigan, and they've been not just responsive but tremendously helpful. Like I've kind of lost count of those those times, and you know I don't actually. I think all but one of my jobs has come because I had a Michigan connection, which is, I think is pretty tremendous when I think about the power of the university in my life. Yeah, I think all but one. So that I mean, it's just as it is. I spent 7 years there total. At this point, it's a fraction of my life, but it continues to kind of be this thread that ties everything together. So, a huge. I would not have done things any differently. I'm a huge fan of Michigan. Just being here, like Michigan has unbelievable resources, and it's not just treasure. It's the talent and it's the time of people who are so bright, and so innovative and so entrepreneurial, and so anything from strengthening the internship pipeline between the critical programs, and I tend to think of those things like urban planning, design, public policy, the law school, like strengthening kind of that collaboration and that conversation between Detroit and those respective programs, is one place. And when I was in grad school, no one wanted to stay in Southeast Michigan. And I mean, this is not even like, this is barely 10 years ago. And seriously, like, even if you were from here, it was, I'm going to do a couple of years in Ann Arbor, and then, I'm going out to the coast, or I'm going to Chicago, or, maybe, Atlanta. But now, I think it's kind of the right time for not just Michigan, but all the universities, that are sending graduates out into other places to kind of change that narrative, so that students see the tremendous opportunity, that is this moment that's in Detroit now, and actually spend some portion of their career kind of working on Detroit-based issues. So there's a whole range of things. It's just I think it just starts with, Michigan was founded here 200 years ago, and so, or 198, and so it should have a presence. It should have a connection. It should have some measure of influence, and definitely has a lot to offer. I said this before, going to Michigan was for me, it was a life defining decision, and both personally and professionally, and it continues to be so.
Yeah. Do you have advice for future U of M students?
Probably don't want to say it out loud. I'm a really big proponent of people taking risk. And I don't necessarily mean like unanalyzed risk, but it's okay. Like what I tell people, particularly when they're thinking about grad school, but what I tell people is, it actually is okay to do things that are a little bit off the beaten path. It's okay that if everyone else around you is saying you have to go into STEM, and you don't like STEM, it's okay to say, that's actually not how. That's not how I want to spend my educational opportunity. That's not how I want to spend my time. You can't get time back. And so I'm a real big proponent of, encouraging people to really think about what, not so much what makes them happy, but pushing aside stuff that they know is going to make them miserable in the long term, and just don't do it, and if what you think you enjoy career-wise is kind of not one of the trendy things, that's okay. If you're really serious about it, and it's something that really resonates with you, you'll figure out a way to make it work. I mean, I started my career as a teacher. I've worked at a nonprofit. I've worked at a big global investment bank. I've worked for a municipal government, and now I'm doing a startup. So, it's just you'll kind of figure out a path. But I do encourage people to be a little bit fearless when they're thinking about like what degree and what major, because there's a lot of tunnel vision in picking majors.
Yes.
A whole lot. So yeah, I guess that's the advice is for anyone who is trying to kind of figure out what major, what grad program, what path. Don't be afraid to be a little fearless in it, and don't be afraid to turn off all the chatter of what is the now thing to be doing with your life. Nothing worse than spending your whole career in a job that is not right for you.